Hello, I'm David Heyman, and I play Brace on the TV show Taboo. And you're listening to the Shat on TV podcast with Roger, Gene, and Big D.
Welcome back to Shat on TV Taboo Edition, the unofficial podcast companion piece to the hit FX series Taboo. I am one of your hosts, Roger Roper, and alongside me are my two co-hosts, Big D Dick Ebert.
Good evening.
And Gene Lyons.
I will squash your balls myself and make you eat the paste.
And this is our episode where we look back on the season finale of Taboo and provide our immediate reactions, thoughts, and analysis. This week's episode, like I mentioned, was the season finale of season 1. Guys, what did you think?
I got to tell you, I think there's a lot of parts of it that were beautifully executed, but as a whole, I felt a bit disappointed. I think if we were still to believe that this was meant to be a standalone 1-season, 8-episode miniseries or story, it seems a bit odd how the ending was left so opened for obvious season 2 or 3. Makes me feel a little bit misled.
I'm on the opposite side of the spectrum, Big D. I really enjoyed this one. I felt like there was some plot holes, but at the same time, amazing performances by several of the actors. A lot of things that we loved about the show were brought back in full force. We got to see some swashbuckling, and it left me reflecting on how much the show has left me change, and we'll get into that in a bit, but I really love this episode. I thought it was perhaps the strongest episode of the entire series.
Yeah, I think another thing that bothered me is all along we've been trying to figure out what was, James's plan, and we're going to go into it in depth a little bit later. But it seemed a bit overly complicated and far-reaching, and didn't really feel believable to me that you would put all your eggs into this basket with so many variables that were out of your control. In the end, did it turn into just a glorified heist show?
Yeah, I think that's, part of the questions that we're here to answer for you. If this is your first time finding Shat on TV Taboo Edition, welcome. For those of you who've been with us the entire season, you know how the format goes. We talk in buckets. We talk in, ideas, overarching themes of the episode. We don't go in a linear plot by plot format like other shows do. So we encourage you to watch the show and then listen and join the conversation. We have a fan and listener feedback show that we do every Friday. If you want to be part of that conversation, our email address is hosts@shatontv.com. And for you first timers, please subscribe everywhere fine podcasts are found, including iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and YouTube. So the main topics that I want to ask, the questions that we're going to be discussing today: did the finale stick the landing? What do we make of the mysticism we saw in the series in the first half? Was it just bait and switch? Now that we've seen James's entire plan, to your point, Big D, what did we think of it? What did he hope to accomplish? Were Strange and Dumbarton in cahoots the entire time? And if so, when did James first realize that? Character deaths came fast and furious in this episode. Whose death were you most upset about? Who are you glad survived? And then we'll finalize the conversations today with what questions are still left unanswered in your opinion, and what is next for James Delaney. So again, spoiler alert, if you don't want to know what happened in the episode, now's your time to turn off the podcast, go watch it, and come back. But with that being said, did the finale finally stick the landing?
Well, that's a question for you, Raj. Now, what did you think? You're always asking us.
Yeah, I immediately texted you guys because I think I finished watching it first, and I said this is my favorite episode of the season thus far. The caveat being, I wanted the entire series to be this episode. If the series, I feel like the series struggled with an identity crisis. It never truly understood what it was. And I think for me, that's what I've struggled with the entire season. I've been very vocal about that, is what is the show? When you go back and I listened to the first podcast that we did after episode 1, and I think Gene and Big D, you guys labeled it a horror show, right? That's what we thought it was going to be. And there were times in episodes where it was. But like you, Big D, if they had just focused on this intrigue and this double crossing heist and bring down to the EIC and the ultimate goal of leaving to go to America ended in a culmination of a huge dock fight at the end with swashbuckling and some black sails action, that would have been the perfect show for me. That's what I was hoping the show would be.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think we early on called it a whodunit, and with some undertones of mysticism. But if you look at them now, almost in 2-episode buckets, they were almost 4 different independent series. You had the beginning, which was a whodunit, some mysticism. Then you had the relationship building with Zilpha. Then there was the slave aspect. Instead of having the storylines weave throughout the entire 10 episodes, it would have been nice to have it evened out.
I wanted to point to, I agree with both of you, and especially with you, Raj, on the fact that I was satisfied with many of the episodes throughout this series, but I could have done with everything that they did on this one for 8 episodes. Absolutely. The performances, the dialogue seemed to be turned up to 10. Like everything that was going on with Jonathan Pryce, with Jesse Buckley, with Tom Hardy, David Heyman, all of them were at their best in this episode. They were giving amazing performances. And then you partner that with some intrigue and a lot of action, you've got a great television show that I challenge anybody to watch this show and say this episode was boring.
Yeah, and I monitored social media, Reddit, our Twitter page. In fact, I reached out to the European listeners on Saturday night and I said, hey guys, give us your feedback without any kind of spoilers. And the majority of the reactions were very positive. They said this was their favorite episode. The majority of people, there were some people that said they didn't really like it. And those were the people, like you said, Gene, who were more interested in the dark horror elements. It feels like it took a hard left turn at the end. And I think that maybe it turned off a couple of those viewers, but a lot of people shared our same sentiment. This show was over stylized in a hyper normal perspective, and that was great. That part they really enjoyed about the show, but the narrative seemed to be all over the place, and I think that's what's going to ultimately be the lingering aftertaste in our mouths.
I think what I like is that there were so many theories. None of them were all correct. It was a combination of certain ones, so they still kept us guessing to the end. I like the fact, you'd mentioned, Gene, the action, how the action was great. The action caught me off guard many times where you expect, our core group of 15, the Legion of the Damned, they're going to survive. They were getting shot left and right. It seemed realistic that at any point, any of them could be killed, and I liked that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I was watching it with my lady friend, and she was really she was like she was on the edge of her seat. She's like, I don't want that person to die. They're killing off all the people that I really like. And I know, Gene, you and I had the conversation on the most recent River Rants of which characters would we be most, scared to, see die off. And I know that's one of our topics that we'll dive into. But just to see someone who doesn't do a podcast 2 times a week say that was refreshing to me. I was like, well, they're finally fucking pulling it off. They're finally making us feel something for the characters that I just don't understand why they waited until the last episode of the season to do that.
Absolutely. And on the boat, when they've escaped and Chun-Li's there and he's all burnt up from the explosion, you're assuming that he's probably going to die. He seems that he's dying there. That moment made me actually care about him. I wanted him to survive. I was sad about it. But it also opened another thought in my head. So he's sitting there and he's speaking to Godders, not realizing it's Godders, and he says, "You always had such beautiful fingers. I'm sorry for what I did to you." And Godders comforts him and says, "You are forgiven." And this scene, when you take that out of the context of this show, if you just put it out there without everything, all the setup, you've got a guy who's like basically a mad chemist who does a ton of drugs and is a womanizer, on his deathbed confessing to a man in drag in the hull of a boat full of like miscreants, essentially, and you actually are pulling for him. And that made me think about all the other things that I was pulling for Zilpha and James. So we're rooting for incest, homicide, homosexuality, gender swapping, drug use, and so I think that the finale actually showed us that we developed this feeling for the characters that we didn't even know existed until the end, and that was really cool.
Well, let me ask you a big question on everyone's mind, and this was a lot of the feedback that was, all over the message boards on Reddit and on Twitter, and private messages that it was exchanging back with the fans. Was the character of Zilpha wasted? Because in the first 30 seconds, it has, a Game of Thrones, moment where she just fucking jumps off the ledge of the bridge. And it seems like the character that we were supposed to care about, I had zero qualms about her dying.
I agree with that. And it was so counterintuitive because they'd spent the most time developing her character. We had the most time invested in understanding in her backstory, what motivated her, what was she hoping for? And they killed her off in a way that really had very limited emotional impact. And I felt that was a waste. We dedicated so much of the season to her character arc, and to have it come to such an abrupt end that didn't seem to tie into the overall arc, other than the impact it had on James, which was very little. I felt like it could have been done so much better, and it could have really crushed us.
Yeah, so I did care about her dying. I want to point that out, that I was fascinated by the character of Zilpha, and I really wanted to know more about her. That was actually the person I was most interested in this show. So I felt it was a big throwaway as well. Now, granted, they do leave the door open a crack in the sense that, he says that he would have sensed it, but I took that as more as this is the moment where James realizes that his powers are bullshit, that he doesn't feel that he's actually not that sensitive.
And I hope that is the case, because we had talked in the previous episode about how this was Zilpha's chance to stand up on her own, and we had wanted her to take control. And if it doesn't end in suicide, I'd really, really like that, because I think it cheapens the growth she had as a character.
So when we talk about the idea of it sticking the landing, right? So what elements in your mind did you absolutely need to see for it to stick the landing?
I think for me, it was the question of, will they be able to tie this all together in a way that makes sense, or wow me in a way that I don't care that it makes sense? And I think that they did a good job of that.
The wowing factor or the tying all the loose ends together?
They did both in a sense. So there was some far-fetched, as Big D said, the plot was a little far-fetched. It was, what it reminded me of was Lord of the Rings. In Lord of the Rings, they could have just taken the ring, gone to the fucking mountain and thrown it in, or put it, given one of the eagles and been like, just go drop it in the mountain, we'll be good. But it was, the Lord of the Rings isn't about destroying the ring, right? It's about everybody and their path on the way to do it, and the decisions people make. So in that sense, I felt like, same thing. It didn't make a lot of sense. You could have killed Strange and gotten on a boat and taken off. Oh, that's pretty easy. Like, you don't have to do all this other shit, right? So in that sense, I think that they did that. But they also did a great job of answering some questions very plainly. Like, who killed Winter? Let's give you a very plain answer to that. Who killed Horace? Here's a very plain answer to that. Like, what happened, down the line, they kind of were like, okay, they gave people, was James actually on the ship? Did he actually do what, did he actually kill slaves? Yes. Like, all the questions are answered there.
Do you think that this, the ending leaves it open for possibilities? There's been rumors. In fact, we talked about the 3-season arc that Stephen Knight, one of the creators, says that he has envisioned. But then recently it came out in a Swedish or one of the Scandinavian magazines that Tom Hardy says that he could go 7 seasons. So, I mean, do you think this show can go beyond season 1?
Did you ask, does it leave it open? I was waiting for a Back to the Future ending where it says to be continued right on the screen. It was so overtly opened.
Right.
That bothered me. It just totally was set up for the future. And without a season 2 or 3, I think it will affect the way we view this 8-run series as a whole.
Gunpowder? Where we're going, we don't need gunpowder.
Yeah. Listen, there's a lot of problems I have with it. I think I'm more on the camp of it wowed me enough to where I would be interested in seeing a second series versus tying it all together in a satisfying way. Big D, you commended me, hey, I should pick up Homeland again after season 5 when they kind of reboot the story 2 years later. Yeah. And I did. Today, I binge watched 3 episodes. It's amazing. Like, the story and the narratives make sense, and it all comes together. And I'm like, this is what I needed out of Taboo. But focusing in on Taboo, some of the things that we had a major problem with, the 3 of us, as we were talking offline, the mysticism seemed to take a backseat. Right, it was such a major part of the series in the beginning and in the middle, and the whole James going into the river and having flashes of his mother and having mother problems when he's having sex with his sister. But then there was none of that in the final season. I mean, it seemed like it was when he started doing his voodoo chanting was more of a distraction to get out, to a ruse, so to speak, when he's in front of Coop. Was it all just bait and switch? Was this did this really happen? Did it really need to be part of the story?
I think it did, but I don't think it was done well, in the sense that we should be able to figure out at this point that James's visions it's all in his head, that none of this is real, that the slave that he sees, or the demon or the slave, whatever he sees in the morgue and on the ship when he tears the ship apart and when he's seeing his mother, it's all, and we were being pointed in that direction when he would only have these visions. The visions would change based on information he was getting, which tells you that that's in his head. What's interesting about it, though, is they still don't, it's like a magician. They still don't they don't show you the entire trick, in the sense that when Robert finds Chun-Li, and Chun-Li's like, how does he always know how to find me? We still don't know.
Well, I'm just worried that they use the mysticism as an attraction selling point to the series, that you generally have 1 or 2 episodes to really grab an audience. If this started out to what it really ended up being, a heist or, a whodunit, it doesn't seem as compelling must-watch TV. But when you start throwing Tom Hardy and Dark London and some mystical visions, it was kind of, you were just putting some pretty window dressing to get people maybe hooked on a series that they normally wouldn't have watched. And for that, I'll accept it. But I wish they had given us a more even presentation throughout, because I would have watched it regardless, but maybe that's not the typical audience.
I'm always looking to go a level deeper than the place that the show is showing me, like, than the obvious, right? And so when I was watching the scene where he's reading the suicide note, when James is reading the suicide note, and he's brought to tears and he's broken here, and at first I thought it was over Zilpha, and it could be over Zilpha, but it's not simply over Zilpha. He says, if the dead don't sing, then how do I hear them? I think he's having a realization here that his mind is broken and he gets it now. Like, how can it be possible that she is dead and I don't hear her? And again, the thing that would really piss me off about this is if the note caused him to imagine what her suicide would be like, and that's what we were seeing. That would be horrible.
Yeah, I think James always felt empowered by this belief that he was different. He bought into the mystique. He bought into this, that everyone would say, oh, he's the devil. Oh, stay away from him. He has these powers. He believed it. He bought it. And for him to come to a realization in that moment that, no, I'm just a regular man who's got some issues, it crushed him.
Do you think that's why in the shootout he wasn't as bold as usual? He kind of poked his head around and ducked back. How many guys are over there? Earlier in the season, you would have seen him walk out there with 2 pistols firing away.
100%. His cloak of invincibility had been ripped off. He's no longer bold. He now realizes he's been lucky all along, that it wasn't divine, that it wasn't destiny, that he was going to make it to America. And he quickly changed his tune and his tactics.
So you think that the idea that the whole revenant idea that he was brought back to life or to serve a single purpose, that's been thrown out the window now. And you think it was just all in his head, and then he discovered that it was all in his head when?
I think at that moment, honestly, I think that's where he has this epiphany that, he's sitting there, he's reading Zilpha's note. He realizes that, Lorna's there talking sense to him, and he needs to lift himself out of this and realize that, like, something's wrong with me.
Yeah, I think that's the moment that it clicks. But this was started a few episodes earlier with Brace's revealing to James that his mother was actually trying to kill him in the river. And we see that revelation start to change, as Gene had mentioned, what James's visions looked like. And they went from a loving memory with his mother to now that violence that shook him, that made him question. So he started questioning a while ago, but the letter was the trigger that made him internalize it.
Does it seem as if his entire attraction to Zilpha all along was just an Oedipal relationship that he had with his mother? When he found out that she was possibly trying to kill him, that he no longer loves Zilpha as a result of that. Like, once he found out that his mother literally was trying to kill him as a baby, his entire attraction seemed at the same time to coincide with him having zero feelings for Zilpha.
I think it could always just be something as simple as you want what you can't have. How many times have you broken up with a girlfriend or then they move on and then you're like, oh, wait, what did I do? Or growing up, I never had a swimming pool. All my friends had swimming pools and that made me want it. They took it for granted because they had it. Possibly James's entire drive and attraction and lust for Zilpha was the fact that he couldn't have her. And when he finally got her, the thrill and the desire and everything that had motivated him all along was gone.
I'm going to side with Raj on this one, though, because it is interesting timing that as his love or admiration, this story that he had in his head of what his mother was changed, that coincided with the fact that his approach towards Zilpha changed, his feelings toward her changed. That's a really interesting take on it. I had thought the whole time that essentially it came down to with Zilpha that it was, again, going back to him feeling special, that he's different, that he has to have something that's different from everybody else. But it's very interesting that his change, again, if we rule this down to it's all in his head, then his attraction to her and the mother reaching out to him is, again, all in his head.
Right.
And why would that happen exactly when he's, inside her, essentially? That is some dark shit.
That's the only thing that I could think of that would make sense to me. And I know a lot of, we've got a lot of listener mail that have, alluded to it. It's an Oedipal complex that he has with Zilpha and the mother. And then once he no longer had love for the mother, he no longer had love for Zilpha.
God, we thought that last episode he was trying to be extra harsh to break up with her so that she wouldn't kind of get pulled into the vortex of his life. Maybe he was just truly disgusted with himself and what they had done.
Yeah, I think so.
Still a babe, though. I mean, it might just be that she's the hottest person on the show.
Yeah. Well, the next question that I have, guys, is, and we've talked about this throughout the entire season and every episode almost, it's brought up that at the end and the conclusion, we were promised that all the puzzle pieces, when we look back, are all going to fit together. So now that we've seen James's entire plan, now that we've seen the conclusion, what did we think of it? And what ultimately did he hope to accomplish?
Well, I think his plan was overly complicated and was just wrought with danger. So many variables he had no control over, especially when he's in the tower. The main problem I had was, he set up Robert with the key to the chest and all the notes, but how could he guarantee that in that small window of time that young Robert would locate all 15 of them? Shaman Leaf, he's a drug addict who likes prostitutes. He could have been in one of 100 different brothels in who knows where the hell he passed out. And that you're going to find him in any shape to sober him up and get him making all of his Inspector Gadget bombs and booby traps at the end was a bit of a stretch.
Yeah, in order for me to have suspension of disbelief, the plot has to make some sort of logical sense, like you said, Big D. And I think they overuse style to make up for the lack of substance for me to be completely, have a complete suspension of disbelief. And they did that effectively enough to where I am satisfied. However, like you said, Chun-Li is a wild card. How is he supposed to know? We're just supposed to believe that his mysticism led him there. Is the powers that he supposedly no longer has? I mean, they can't use that as an excuse anymore.
So I'm going to just kind of go through what some of his accomplishments were, and we'll try to rank them and see what we thought his main goal was.
All right.
Was his goal to kill Strange? Was his goal to eventually make it to the U.S.? Was it to destroy the East India? Was it to give some credence to George's case against the East India with the slavery?
So it could go a lot of ways, and I was thinking about this too. It boils down to this. It really boils down to the Chichester question. If James is using Chichester as he used other people, he was using him as insurance, right? That if the bomb doesn't go off, if Strange doesn't get killed, I still want the EIC to fall. I've got this guy that's going to work it through the courts, right? He's covering his bases. If you answer that question, then you can answer the question on everything else. Because if, in fact, he was trying to help Chichester find justice, then he's trying to help all these people escape to a new life. And that's his goal. But if he's just using him as a tool, then he's using all these people as a tool just to get out of there and bring down the EIC and escape. So again, it's a question of, now I agree 100% that if any of these objectives that you want to achieve could have been done much simpler and much more straightforward and much more assured.
But I just don't know how much James really helped the cause with the slavery. How much credence will the Crown in this investigation give the sworn testimony of two individuals who up until that day were believed to have committed high treason, and now they go and they kill a couple handful of royal soldiers? Why are you going to believe their accounts of the East India?
Very simple reason, Big D. The Crown hates the East India. This is ammunition for them. This is wonderful. Right. I mean, so they'll still buy into it. You got to remember that this struggle a century before any of these events, even, throughout the 18th century, is a progressive movement of the East India to try to stay a step ahead and get more powerful, and the crown to seize power away from them. The crown wants to gradually kind of turn the crank on them. That's why they keep, with these progressive charters that they're passing, they keep taking a little bit more power away from the East India, and this is going to knock them dead, because Strange is dead, and you've also got, they're being implied essentially. But I don't think that this is about the whole thing with Chichester. It's not about giving the crown. It was in case the bomb doesn't go off. Then you've still got something against him, right? You want to give the crown ammunition against him. But the bomb did go off, so, mission accomplished.
Yeah, but I think the bomb wasn't necessarily to kill the EIC. The bomb was just to kill Sir Strange, right? Because regardless of Strange lives or dies, you got to still take down the EIC.
Right, but the paperwork doesn't do that. All the paperwork does is says that Strange was a part of this plan to move slaves illegally. So it's not taking down the EIC. In fact, it insulates the EIC from further prosecution, because it limits it to this guy.
But he did it under the flag of the EIC. And this is the problem that I had with the entire episode, or the entire series. I thought that this series, and we've talked about the historical elements, and you bring in the history of at the time, and there's a lot to go here. And when the series was kind of explained to us, it was explained that the EIC is the modern day equivalent of a Homeland Security, NSA, CIA, FBI, all rolled into one, an ultra mega multinational corporation, right? The power plays. That's what I found interesting, and I feel like a lot of people did. And I felt had they concentrated on that a little bit more versus this African mysticism, Oedipal complex that he had with his mother and his relationship with his sister that ultimately is thrown away, I think you still could have had a satisfying series that I would have had, just focus on the historical elements and make it a historical fiction that's interesting.
Yeah, what would have made the show really powerful is if, instead of focusing again on the mysticism and all this other stuff, they would have taken that same amount of time and shown the depth of the treachery of the EIC. Now you really hate them. And then at the same time, you show that James and his crew can go even darker. And that's the thing. Who's the baddest, Yeah.
Exactly. You could have had entire episodes focused on what Strange and the EIC do. Right, you could have had entire episodes dedicated to the Crown versus the EIC, instead of having throwaway episodes where Delaney's grunting.
Yeah, you talk about the importance of seeing the sins of the East Indian, Sir Stuart Strange. I had an issue with James's plan pivoting on the belief that at this key moment, Sir Stuart Strange will completely do an about face in his entire character. He's been strong the entire 8-run episode. We start off the episode in the tower, and he's having a conversation with James openly about what they did with the boys and how he would staff the ships. And Sir Stuart Strange that we've seen would not have that conversation. And for James to believe that in that last minute, he'd be able to flip him on the threat of treason simply because the East India was flying the American flag didn't seem true to his character.
Yeah, and again, I hate to go back to what we've covered before on Chat on TV, but when I look at Westworld, right, the fact that they were able to weave in different time frames within a single narrative and show that versus exposition, and I think, Gene, there was episode 8 of Westworld when they're in the elevator and they're just kind of spouting exposition. You're like, that was the weakest scene because they're telling the audience instead of showing us. But a lot of Westworld was showing us the evolution of the Man in Black, right? The evolution of characters. How great would it have been had they shown a young Delaney in cahoots with Strange, or shown like a young, give us that backstory. Show us that backstory. Show us, what Horace Delaney was. I think that was what I struggled with.
On the other hand, Westworld had the rapid about face of the Man in Black, where I'm like, I'm William, I'm crazy, I'm gonna kill everybody. So, in the same sense, come on. Spoiler alert, by the way, William is the Man in Black.
Well, all right. So the question that I have on Strange, and so it turns out that Dumbarton and Strange might have been in cahoots the entire time, correct?
It depends on how you define the entire time. The entire time we've seen this show, or like from the get-go, these guys like that Dumbarton's been in the employ of Strange, because Dumbarton clearly is being blackmailed. James says to him, basically that he was wagged in front of the crown, like a morsel essentially. The EIC knew that he was an American spy, and then could actually say, "Hey, we're going to turn you over unless you play by our rules." And then, Dumbarton says, "No one in this city has only one master," to which James replies, "I do." So it's a case of blackmail.
But I just makes me wonder, at what point did James realize this? In their final discussion before James decides to string them up, first of all, I don't know how the hell you manually do that as one person. How do you lift someone up that way and hang them in such an artistic presentation? But what point do you think he really clicked for him that this was Strange's ace in the hole?
I mean, it could possibly go back all the way to the episode of when he sent the assassin to kill him, right? What better way to tie a loose end than send an assassin and then cover up for it? It was, I was testing you. What if the entire time Dumbarton was playing James? Dumbarton was already turned, but he was a rogue. He was playing James. He got him to trust him by stitching him up.
Well, I just don't understand why Dumbarton, if he's been compromised, doesn't get the first ship back to America and say, "I'm getting the hell out of here." Like, why would you continue to now work for the EIC? Although the EIC is at odds with the Crown, so maybe you hope that you can still get, the enemy of my enemy is my friend sort of thing. But
right.
If I were Dumbarton, I get the hell out of there. And it is interesting how easily he was turned, when at first he's so resolute in the face of James and is an imposing force upon himself. I think we all agreed that Dumbarton seemed like he was a pretty scary dude, and then he ends up just being so easily. So many people were just flipped so easily in this show.
Okay, so explain this to me like I'm 5, right? Okay, so Dumbarton was an American spy. We knew up until the episode 8 that he was an American spy working with the Countess Musgrove, who was also an American spy. Am I correct so far?
Yes.
Okay. When Lorna goes to Musgrove has no idea that Dumbarton has turned. Is that what she learns?
Correct. That's correct.
And then Musgrove gives Lorna the safe passage that they need to get through the blockade.
Yes.
Correct?
Correct.
Okay. Yep. All right. Because that was a lot of... I had questions on that, and I heard a lot of people on the message boards go, explain this to me. Like, I don't really know what the whole interaction there was. So that's how Lorna knew, and James knew, that Dumbarton was compromised, because Lorna went to Musgrove, and Musgrove had no idea what Dumbarton was doing. Yes?
Correct. Without Lorna circumventing Dumbarton and going directly to Musgrove,
right,
James and his crew are screwed. They need safe passage to America.
Yeah.
So without that, one twist that we now know that the Countess did not know what Dumbarton was truly up to, and
right,
she was able to leverage the fact that they still had gunpowder and could deliver it. That was what enabled James to finally string up Dumbarton and take away that one piece of leverage they had.
And so now it makes, I mean, maybe the producers are right. Now the puzzle pieces are kind of falling into me. So when you ask me, okay, when was Dumbarton compromised? The fact that the conversation that Delaney has with Musgrove on, in her field, where he brings something up about Dumbarton that she's like, I don't know what you're fucking talking about. I'm paraphrasing here. Maybe Dumbarton was doing stuff behind her back the entire time. And that's when it clicked for James that Dumbarton was compromised. It was turned.
It was I think it was episode 5. They meet at the Countess's, her estate. And
right,
James mentioned the gunpowder, that Dumbarton has said he needs it. She has
right,
no knowledge of it. We questioned whether Dumbarton was working with the revolution, or maybe
right,
Musgrove really was not Musgrove and she was just masquerading. But now it's clear he was working independently, and maybe that was the moment that James realized it.
Well, shit. I know we talked about the whole revolution. They could have brought that into this. They could have brought in the Napoleonic Wars into this, because that's happening at the exact same time. Jesus. All right. Anyway, so the next topic I want to talk about is the character deaths came fast and furious in this episode, especially during the battle down at the docks. Whose death were you most upset about, and who are you glad that survived or think possibly survived?
Yeah, as far as the deaths go, I was most upset, and we talked about it before, with Zilpha's death. Several viewers predicted Zilpha would kill herself, particularly Tanya from Tokyo, who wrote in for the River Rants. I didn't think this was going to happen. It drew the curtains on some serious potential, as Big D mentioned, and I accept that from the show, though, in the sense that they can still steer it in a lot of different directions. One of the great things about the ending of this show, I felt, was that it left the door wide open and we could explore lots of different things. Like what does happen to Zilpha, what happened on her last day. Does she continue to communicate as a figment of James's memory from the dead that he imagines her? So there's a lot of ways this could go. Zilpha may not be done as a character. She's hopefully done as a living human being.
Yeah, so I'm excited that Atticus is still alive. Atticus, that was one character that I was really rooting for. I was really rooting for Chun-Li to survive, and I do believe that Chun-Li survives. I feel like the show would suffer without a character like Chun-Li. Right? He brought levity. He was a fun character to watch. I think Lorna Bowe survives. And I think that, people are predicting there might be a romance of sorts that's going to develop out of that. Now, even though that she's his new mother, she proclaims herself as new mother. Maybe that becomes the taboo thing of season 2, is that now he's fallen in love with his stepmom. And I was also happy to see that Brace survived, even though he's not on the ship, right? Even though that's a character's death, so to speak, that, he didn't get to go and taste freedom in America.
So regarding Brace's death, I was a little confused here. When the Redcoats are coming, you see Brace, he's got a pistol. He's ready to go.
Two
pistols.
Yeah.
Well, two pistols. I made the two pistols hands. You guys can see them. The listeners at home can't see them.
It's a visual medium.
Yeah, okay. So anyway, but yeah, he's got two pistols, and suddenly we're like, I was like, oh, we're gonna see Brace kick some ass, and suddenly he's like at home. But here's the thing about that scene. That scene when Chichester goes to the house was beautiful because you see Brace having to make a decision there. He's there. He's master of the house now. He's looking at a single candle. He's got the dog at his side. And the dog, to me, is representative of becoming master, right? That the dog now shows him affection and and treats him as master. He is now master of the house. He has found his resolution. James was right that he was not born for freedom, that he was not born to go to America. He now has this home in London, and he is his own master. And I think that's a very poetic ending for Brace. It's what he deserves. He's in with the ghosts of Horace, but also free in his own home.
He could, listen, it's still the early 1800s in America, right? We were not that evolved as Americans in this period of time. He still could have been, he still could have been James's servant and butler at the time in America. You know what I mean? Like, and then the third thing that I have a problem with is the battle, right? It seems as if those who didn't make it onto the ship either died or were captured by the Redcoats. How did Brace escape? Right? What if we see him there about to fight? That's left unresolved. And I think a lot of people, even though they enjoyed the fight sequence, it wasn't, in my opinion, very well set up for the audience to understand what they were trying to do, right? Which is Big D, from a military strategy perspective, they knew that they would probably be outgunned and outnumbered, so they were trying to create a choke point, a la the movie 300, to where they could overpower them and outflank them, right? But when that one woman fires off the shot too early, that kind of throws their plan into disarray. Was I reading that correctly?
The choke point actually is called the fatal funnel. But Chamonli, man, he could make some bombs, right?
Yeah, not a single one failed. That was kind of impressive at that time. Now, look, I've been playing a lot of Battlefield 1 in the last couple months, and that caused me to do an innate amount of World War I research. Listen, explosives in World War I failed regularly. There's like millions of tons of unexploded ordnance all over Europe. This guy is a great bomb maker.
How great is the dialogue between Chamonli and Robert when they're carrying the bombs, and he's whispering to him? He's like, "Don't use any harsh language. I'm covered in explosives." So subtle, but so great.
But that's why we need Chun-Li in season 2. It's lines like that. And, even though we didn't get to see, just talking about characters that we cared about dying, but didn't necessarily, they weren't fleshed out. The big giant brother-in-law of Atticus, when he's there just laying waste to 8 soldiers, that was great to see. Atticus's henchman, I don't even know what his name was, but he was a cool character, right? When he's, he goes into the docks and fires up his gun and is warning everyone to get away. That guy seemed really cool. I wanted to see more of him.
Yeah, he also had he's got every hipster girl in America swooning right now. That beard and that hair.
Oh my God, absolutely.
You're talking about the bargain basement Hugh Jackman?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's exactly what I'm talking about. So, I mean, so that being said, what questions are still left unanswered in your opinion?
Okay, in the end, we'd question, was Lorna an agent? Was she possibly working for the EIC or the Crown? Were we led to believe that Nancy Drew, who went around investigating, interrogating, uncovering the true murderer of Winter, was really in the end just a stage actress?
There's a huge tell in this episode on that. When she goes and faces off with the Countess Musgrove, and Musgrove puts the knife to her throat, and she stands up to her, she's got this like pride, like it is very Nancy Drew. Like it's like, oh, like I stood up to a real agent. Like look at me, and she's so pretty. She goes back and tells James like, I got the letter of safe passage. Like this is the housewife who like somehow solved the mystery. It's a weird situation, and that leads me to believe that if that is the case, if she's truly just an actress, then her entire drive in this is an attraction to James. It's a fondness for James. It's the only reason. It's the only skin she has in the game.
I agree. I definitely agree with that.
Only skin in the game? She was legally Horace's wife. The skin in the game is the house, is the trading company, is the bourbon company.
What fucking house, trading company, bourbon company? They're all gone.
Well, now it's all gone, but in the beginning she had some skin in the game. There was actually something of substance.
Right, but she's risking her life knowing she's getting on a boat.
Oh, I got what you're saying.
with a mass murderer who also cuts out people's organs and fucked his sister.
With her stepson Jack the Ripper.
If you read half of our emails, it seems like 90% of our female audience would get on the boat with James as well.
That's right. That's absolutely right. The question I have is Robert the boy is still alive, correct? Is he on the ship or is he with he's on the ship, yeah?
Yeah, he's on the ship.
He's still alive.
Yeah.
Yes.
He's
Okay.
alive.
I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. He's still alive.
We're like 40 minutes into this episode. I think we would have brought that up. The fact that a child died.
I thought you guys were just like adhering to the outline. I was really excited that we're on track this episode. Zilpha. That's a good character to ask. Is she still alive or is she not? In my opinion, if we subscribe to the idea that he does still have paranormal superhero powers, the fact that she didn't come to him if she was a ghost, if we would still believe that whole storyline, then she possibly could be alive just on the riverbanks or some stuff like that. Or maybe the whole thing was just a ploy. Maybe she's using her force, her Star Wars force, to trick James into thinking that she committed suicide.
Or it could be like the OA on Netflix.
Ugh.
She just might wake up in a hospital and not know who she is. We've seen people survive a fall of that distance.
Yeah, it's true.
I don't know that I'd like it, but it's possible.
Yeah. Who the fuck was Carlsbad? That's my next question.
The Countess.
Countess Musgrove.
That was Carlsbad the entire time?
Yeah.
Yes.
Just not explained. So I mean,
It
was absolutely explained.
Totally explained.
But no, okay, no, we've
Hold on, did you want her to wear a name tag that said Carlsbad?
kinda. No, but like we debated this. Because when he says Carlsbad, she looks at him like she has no idea.
Do you wonder how we know she's Carlsbad?
How?
She was able to produce the documents needed to travel to the United States.
All right. Thank you. All right. This is Raj's unanswered questions. The idea of this whole Sankofa, like, and the other thing that seemed to be left unanswered is this whole trip to Africa, right? I mean, he kind of talked about it, but we never actually got to see the scene of him in the loincloth, fully, naked, out and, wandering around with a spear that they had in publicity photos for this show. That seemed to be left unanswered to me.
I think this is a perfect opportunity, Rod, for you to do some fan fiction. You could fill in that entire part. Maybe,
Like
do
a
a blog
prequel?
post. Yeah, do a blog post and write up that entire chapter of James's life.
Do we think the real intentions of the mother were to drown or to present him with powers based on her religion?
I think I'm prepared to believe Brace on this, that the mother was trying to kill him. She was in an untenable situation where she's been brought from America to England. She's been kind of locked up. She's treated as an insane person and not respected. She's asked to deny her tribal identity and be Italian essentially. Look, I think she hated everything that her life had become, and she was trying to kill this child.
Yeah, her trying to kill James wasn't any malicious act. I think in the end, it was her way of trying to protect his soul and to protect him.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think James, everything he's done since that point, that realization, it clicked. He believes it too.
Big D, one of the questions that I think you had written down here was, did he promise Carlsbad the remaining gunpowder for safe passage to America? And is that why they're not heading to America?
It's got to be. I mean, why else? He says there's some business left still opened.
Okay.
I hope it is just to finalize this deal for safe passage, that he's going to honor that part of the agreement. But with James, you never know.
You know, we talked about this episode being wide open to other possibilities. It's, you know, a season 2, perhaps not a season 2. I think a lot of these decisions were made with that in mind, in the sense that we don't know if Chun-Li survives. We don't know if Lorna survives. I mean, she could even die potentially. We know that they're not going straight to America, and this allows them some flexibility in the narrative. It could be a short stop in the Azores, or it could be a whole season there. Like, you have no idea what's going on. Oddly, very Pirates of the Caribbean, but you know, I won't go down that path.
All right. So the colonnade is a person at the Azores, correct? That's the contact that he has to deliver this gunpowder to. Now, where are the Azores?
The Azores are off of they're kind of a midway point between between Europe and the Americas, and essentially It was a very strategic point because it was kind of where you could stop and, you know, basically replenish supplies, stuff like that. So very, very important stop along the way.
Got it. Okay. Any other? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So going forward, there's one thing I hope that this series does do better. We've mentioned how many times they stick to historical facts and they use that as a baseline for a lot of their storylines. It's based in kind of what happened. How quickly this show went away from the medical conditions and what would happen to the human body in the 1800s. Let's not forget, James was gutted like 4 episodes ago. That's a death sentence in the 1800s. Now you have him in this episode or the episode before, him being tortured to walk that tight line between life and death. But yet he turns right back into parkour James in his battle scenes like nothing has happened to him. I don't want everyone on that ship to make it because it's not believable. Lorna's wound on a ship at sea would kill probably 80% of the people in the time. Chun-Li had his head half blown off. His ear is missing. If all of them make some miraculous recovery on a ship at sea, I'm calling bullshit.
I don't know if I would call it parkour Delaney. I mean, dude does not move particularly fast. He's like, he kind of struts everywhere he goes.
That's right.
But yeah, I agree with you that most of these wounds are pretty bad. They are at sea. I mean, look, I read The Honorable Company, right? A book about the East India, and they had, I mean, you basically had like I think a 1 in 3, and that's on a good ship, a 1 in 3 chance of dying at sea just from the travel, from disease, from from rickets, like from like there was
scurvy.
Was it rickets? Scurvy. Sorry. From scurvy, maybe rickets too. Who knows? And so, you know, but basically the point being is that a healthy person, a healthy young person, could very easily die at sea for no reason at all. If you've got a wound from an explosion or a gunshot, you're pretty fucked.
Right. So what do we ultimately think is up next for James Delaney? Now that, you know, they're out to sea in a Pirates of the Caribbean fashion, there's some people who are on possibly the verge of death. They've got to go to the Azores and drop off this thing. Possibly they may not even be going to America. Are they going to Nootka Sound? What is ultimately next, in your opinion, for James Delaney? What do you need to see in season 2?
Well, they're on a brig, so in that sense, they can't go into pirating, which would be kind of
That's right.
That would be unfortunate if there was a you've got the League of the Damned and they're pirates and they're going around the ocean, you know, as American privateers or something.
Most of it's privateering at this time. Piracy is basically ended at this point.
Right. You have to pirate under a flag, right? So they are Americans, as he declares, and that would be terrible. But I like that the show ends. I thought it ended beautifully in the sense that what it accomplished more than anything was that it made you care about the futures of most of these characters on the ship, and that's a feat unto itself because, Raj, as you and I talked about after episode 7, we didn't give a shit about most of these people. And suddenly I'm like, wow, I hope they make it. I hope everything works out okay. Although Big D being a big storm cloud on them, it says no.
Wait, why am I being a big storm cloud? I like them. I thought
you said everybody's going to die.
If it was realistic, James is 80% scab and open wound. He's been tortured for days.
This
where
is
a doctor had to come stitch him up. You want to put him on a dirty ship at sea? No way. But yes, I want them to survive. They're our little dysfunctional family. And you ask for where it goes. Anywhere, I think, would be great. The open sea. We're not bottled into London. We're not trapped. Give the actual writers time. Anywhere they go, I think, would be more interesting.
Yeah. Well, an article recently came out today. BBC One, despite certain reports and interviews that have been posted that suggested a season 2 is confirmed, BBC One and FX have not yet confirmed a season 2. The article also pointed out that the average number of viewers has decreased since the season premiere. What are your odds that there will be a season 2, knowing that Tom Hardy is still a pretty big movie star, up and coming? You know, he's got, possible more Mad Max movies. He's got the Ridley Scott movie coming out with the Battle of, what was the big battle of Britain? Dunkirk, thank you. So, I mean, Tom Hardy is still a star in demand in Hollywood, right? This was kind of a pet project for him and Stephen Wright and his father. Do you think this comes back? Do you think there's going to be a demand?
Look, beyond all the explanations and adoration I have for this show, beyond all the analysis we've done, it comes down to a question of, does this thing feel like a hit? It doesn't feel like a hit. I was entertained by this episode, but it's not. There are certain shows you see. When you saw that first season of 24, when you saw Westworld, when you saw the first season of Game of Thrones, you know that show is a hit. Like it's taken everybody by storm. Everybody's talking about it. I don't hear people talking about Taboo.
I'll bring you back to one of my favorite shows of all time, Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad was on life support for the first season and a half. It wasn't doing great. I mean, the true determining factor will be once it's put out streaming on Hulu, on Netflix, that will be the gauge, because that's where they're going to open up the audience to the show that's never seen it. If it does well there, it will guarantee a second season. If it just fails to catch on, I don't think we're going to see it.
Yeah, this is where I'm really going to need the audience help, right? A lot of our audience members and a lot of our listeners, we look at the numbers, we look at our downloads, we look at the emails that are written in, we look at our Twitter page. Most of them are in Europe. It doesn't have a huge following in America. I mean, we have American listeners, right? But when you talk about shows on FX, Big D, Fargo, The Americans, Atlanta, even the People versus O.J. Simpson and American Horror Story. Those are all on FX. Those are shows that, at least if they're not hits with, major hits with the audience, critics are talking about them, right? I don't hear American media talking about Taboo in the same vein as those shows. So my question to the European audience is, are they talking about Taboo that way? I mean, I see it written in The Guardian, but I mean, are they talking about, is this show really good? When you go to work the next day, do people talk about this at the water cooler? Is that happening?
Do you even call it a water cooler in Europe?
Yeah, exactly.
It's the bubbler.
It's the bubbler. So I mean, listen, if you have your thoughts on anything that we talked about today, or if you think what your odds are for the show coming back from a season 2, or just answering the question, is this a show that is being talked about in mainstream Europe and in England? Our email address is hosts@shadontv.com. Please email us. Again, the email address hosts@shadontv.com. Like I said, we do a weekly email read and response to the top 10 emails in most cases every week. That happens on Friday. So send in your letters no later than this Thursday to that email address, and there's a very good chance we'll read it and respond to that. Even if we don't respond to the email, you can go to our website, shadontv.com. You can read all the emails. We call it the River Rant section. Just navigate to that part on our website. You can join the conversation there just by clicking, comment box. Also on our website, you can sign up for a shout out, which we do at the end of every episode. Gene, who are our shout outs this week?
This week's shout outs, we'd like to say thanks to for visiting the website and giving us your names and becoming part of the Shat on TV team. We've got Dan, Dave, Matthew from Scotland. Matthew, if you haven't listened to our Highlander episode yet on shatthemovies.com, don't. No, definitely go listen to it. Help us understand your people. Christy, Singe, and finally, last but not least, Dusty Crappin' Shits.
Yeah, that Dusty Crappin' Shits is by far My favorite, because we call them Shat Nation, right? That's the people who follow us as Shat Nation. So Dusty Crappenshits is, I think, a general in Shat Nation, right? We would give him a governorship. Who was the other one that we had last week? What was
Suck Madik?
Suck Madik and Dusty Crappenshits are honorary cabinet members of Shat Nation. Is there anything else we want to talk about this episode before we shut down and get ready for our River Rants fan email episode this Friday? All right, with that being said, on behalf of Big D and Gene Lyons, I'm Roger Roper. Thank you so much for listening.